Yes, I'm happy to be here and say hello to everybody here. Thanks for the invitation. And I'd like to give you a presentation about the challenges in a multipolar world from the side for development. But I have to say, and I have to admit, I'm not a professor. You have to skip that. I'm not a professor, I'm just having a PhD, and it's a German PhD, which is not comparable for an American PhD, which is a lot more valuable than a German PhD. So I just try to be honest. What we see, let me check if this works. Well, yeah, here you go. We're looking today at the German Development Cooperation. German Development Cooperation has been a field for a long time, and it was actually its own ministry was introduced by a liberal Democrat. It was Walter Scheel, which became president of Germany later on in his career. And in other countries, most other countries, it's combined with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have our own Ministry for Development Cooperation. And it's been always a small ministry, but in the recent years, it became more important. Every year it became more important, and the budget rose from, I have this example here, 5.1 billion to now 9.4 billion. We're close to 10 billion budget, and this is a big, even in the German budget overall, this is a big chunk. Why did it become so important? Because we saw that we cannot go on like this in the world, because we have a huge difference in wealth between us, the Western world or the industrialized world, versus the development countries. And if you have a huge unbalanced system, it tends to get equal one day. And this could be disturbing, this could be violent. So, and then 2015, we had a large migration crisis in Germany, what we call a migration crisis. It was not as big as many people think. It was sort of exaggerated in the discussion in Germany. We had an influence, we had about 1.2 million refugees coming to Germany. And this was the first time we came in touch with this unbalanced world of wealth. And so German society sort of woke up and said, we have to do something to stop this migration, trying to get to the source of migration, which is poverty in the end. And I'll come to other reasons, but poverty is, of course, the major drive for migration. Germany is now the second largest donor in the world. We have many countries spending money on development aid, development cooperation, and we're pretty proud to be the second largest donor in the world. But we see at the same time that the multilateral system, the United Nations, is sort of deteriorating. Systems have been more stable in other years, and we see always a financial gap in multilateral corporations like the UN. They lack funding, more or less, or if they get funding, the funding comes with a tag on it where it has to be spent on. So, but Germany gives a lot of money to the United Nations without that tag, so it's free for the United Nations to decide where to put the money in. I think this is important to know. As I said, we're the fourth largest contributor now to the UN budget. About 6% is Germany contributing to UN budgets. And within our German budgets, we have 4.4 billion of bilateral aid, meaning we have cooperation with certain countries. There is negotiations between Germany and certain countries. And after negotiation, they set up a program how development cooperation should work in that country. So this is called bilateral. And then we have multilateral chunk. This is 1.9 billion, which is not, this is the contributions to UN and maybe European funds for cooperation. We have a technical cooperation and we have a financial cooperation, but we have this bilateral and multilateral piece. I'll get into that point later on. And we are now focusing more and more on Africa because Africa is our neighboring continent and might influence our lives here, our daily lives, more than other continents. This is why we turn more and more into development aid for Africa. So 30 to 40% of the German development budget will be going to Africa. Now I'm referring to the government's concept. As you know, we are a liberal party, we are opposition. We do not carry every idea which the government has. Some ideas we oppose, but in the field of development cooperation, there's a lot of common sense between all parties in the German Bundestag. Number one, we support the Sustainable Development Goals. This is the base of all our development cooperation. And another base is the Paris Climate Treaty of 2030. This is sort of baseline. So we all support these goals wherever we can. And the second concept was avoid migration flow from Africa. And so this is a dispute in the German society, whether or not this could be a goal of development aid. But I think it's right because, as I said, if we can develop stable and sustainable economies in Africa, people will not leave their countries. Why should they? And so this is the reason why I think this topic, migration flow, is a good topic in the German development policy. And it's also a good point because you have to raise the money from the taxpayers. And taxpayers say, okay, this is good or this is bad. In politics, you depend on the voters. And if they say it's good to spend money on that, they will vote for you. So I think it's a good point if we say we'll protect Germany from a too high number of immigrants coming in by development aid, so it's easy to raise the money for development aid. The government also has in their contract between the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, they have a rule that is saying if we raise the budget for defense, the same amount, 1-to-1, will go into development aid. So this is the paper. This is not the reality for now. And we'll see how this goes on, because they didn't say when. They just said we'll step up 1-to-1, but they didn't say when. And we'll see in the next budget a huge rise in defense, and we'll see maybe an even budget for development or even less. So this is hard to say. This is a prognosis. This lies in the future. So it's hard to tell which result we'll have. And the policy of German development cooperation of the government is to focus on a smaller number of countries, to be more efficient. That's what they say. But they are sort of giving more money into middle-income countries. It's the idea of stating an example of a working economy. So if you have one country, like say Ivory Coast, which could develop really good, really nice, so neighboring countries will look at it and say, okay, this is a good example, we go the same way. So this is the idea. And we'll focus on a smaller number of countries because they have promised to change their politics, anti-corruption, human rights, and a good functioning civil society, less autocratic system. So this is, every country who promised to do so gets sort of a priority for German development funding. Unfortunately, the German government has a lot of special programs. I could not even tell you all of them because there's so many. One is called the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan is, as you know, Germany, after the Second World War, there was a real Marshall Plan where the Americans contributed a lot of money. This was 10% of their BIP. What is it, BIP? You know BIP? The gross product, gross domestic product? Right, gross domestic, 10% of it. They contributed into the Marshall Plan to re-establish Germany. And that was a huge contribution. And so it's in the German memory, this is a good name, the Marshall Plan. And now our minister said he wants to do a Marshall Plan for Africa. But this is a different thing, because at that time, about 200 million Americans helped about 60 million Germans. Now we're 80 million Germans trying to help 1.23 billion Africans. So this is not working out. So they're trying to do the Marshall Plan on a higher level, saying, okay, this we cannot do alone. Other countries must join into this idea. But it's an isolated idea of our minister, and he uses the good name of Marshall Plan to sort of tranquilize our population. It's a lot of sort of it's a promise to their own people saying, we're doing a Marshall Plan, this will help. I'm not sure if this is going to work out, because it's just the sole idea of Germany and it's not in context with other countries. Then we have programs like Africa Connect, World Without Hunger, Green Innovation Centers, Green Button. Maybe I can comment on the Green Button. The Green Button is the idea of the minister saying that all clothing we have should carry a green button saying it was produced at a sustainable level. It respects all working rights, the international working rights, and so forth. So if you buy clothes with a green button, it should be, you should be safe and you should be politically correct. But this is just an idea, and it's not quite sure if industry will join in and really support the idea of the green button. Now I'm talking about our liberal approach. This is a little different from what the government does. We're saying our money, our budget will always be limited to this sort of endless task. Like developing Africa, you could have trillions of investment needed, and this is not what we can do with our government budgets, because we will not have that money. So the money we pour in should be efficiently used. So we're saying we need more quality than quantity. We don't have another choice. And meaning that we take the money we have and trying to make more money out of it, saying like trying to inspire private investment with the money we have. So we take government money to inspire private investment, so we get a leverage to really get forward in this huge task. Our idea is to support more the multilateral approach rather than the bilateral approach. We have World Bank education programs. Why should Germany have an own education program when we have the World Bank education program? We could pour in the money. So we have a lot of approaches from all kinds of countries in the field of education. That's just an example. We have other fields where multilateral organizations do a very, very good job. And why should we invent it once more again and just have a German approach to it? I think this multilateral is the way to go, because we have more consistency than overall. We believe that development cooperation should be done at a European level, that Europe speaks with one voice for foreign affairs and for development. Because we see that the national development cooperation organizations sort of competing in the field. Like there is actually, like in Mali, all governments trying to stabilize the government of Mali now and then the situation in Mali. So there's a lot of money coming in from all kinds of countries, and there's sort of a competition to get rid of the money. And this is ridiculous, because we need the money, we need a lot of money in other countries. And so we have to get more coherence, more efficiency by working on a European level. Not meaning we are trying to establish a new organization on the European level, but we need a coordination on the European level so that we're not doing the same thing from different countries at the same place. Then we need a better goals and evaluation. Like the problem in German development cooperation is that internally in Germany, when the government says we have spent 100 billion on protecting rainforests, everybody cheers in and says, wow, they have spent so much money. But the result on the ground may be totally different. So it had nothing to do. Like spending money is a success in German development politics. We think this is wrong, and we should change to the real objectives, saying real numbers, like how many hectares of forests have we established, how many schools have we built, so we have real figures, real numbers, rather than just saying, okay, we have spent so much money on education, which doesn't mean anything. Like spending money is easy, but getting the results is the more important thing. And we need more transparency, saying that every money the government spends should be clearly stated on a low-level internet base where everybody can look up where the money goes to. Focus on Africa, this is common sense and good governance, because if we don't have good governance, development will never work. If you have bad governance and corruption and no human rights, no rule of law, how can you invest in those countries? It's not possible. So every industry or every enterprise will not invest in a country where there is no rule of law, where there's no human rights, where there's no labor rights. This has no future, and this is why we say we should no longer support despots, because Western politics has been often stabilizing countries, saying, okay, a stable country is more valuable than a democratic country. And I think this is wrong. In the long run, this will not work out. So we have to cut all kinds of support for autocratic systems, despotic regimes. So this is a hard way to go, I know, but this is the only solution I see. And shift from the support of governments to the support of civil society. So if you have an autocratic system, if you have an autocratic regime, we should shift from budget aid towards the civil society aid. So we have a discussion right now about the support of the least developed countries. Because in the German budget there is less money now for the least developed countries. And we think this is not right, because those countries can really profit from aid, especially for education for women and so forth. So I think there we should change government politics. The liberal approach always is like trade and investment is the best way to develop economies. Trade has been working in Africa quite well. You see the wealth has been growing. The average income has been growing. And also the life expectancy has been growing all over the countries. And this is due to trade, worldwide trade, and this is due to the globalization. So this was the first source of wealth, of growing wealth in other countries. So we believe we should strengthen this trade with Africa, tear down any barriers of customs, and we also would need an European initiative for infrastructure. Like we see the only real investment in infrastructure in Africa is being pledged from China these days. And this is something we see that the Europeans haven't done their job. And this is why China steps in there. And so we should start a European initiative for infrastructure in Africa, a sustainable infrastructure. Like some of the China infrastructure is very cheaply built and will be not working for a long term. And also a lot of countries in Africa have been spending much money on Chinese infrastructure. And the Chinese coming in with their own workers. They're not relying on local workers. They are coming in with their own workers. And then they say, you have to pay for this infrastructure. And then the government says, oh, we cannot pay that. And the Chinese say, oh, you just give this mine of raw materials to us, and that'll pay off the debt. So I think this is a pretty colonialistic politics of China. And but we cannot just blame on China, because infrastructure is needed, and some of the infrastructure is really good. it's working. We should also blame it on the Europeans not having done their job. We think we need funds for founders, cheap loans for investors, and we need a sort of a risk assurance for German companies going to Africa. They need a sort of an insurance for the risks they wouldn't have in other countries where they invest. I think this might help to convince German mid-sized enterprise to go to Africa. Of course, family planning is something we should, especially in the least developed countries, we should take an emphasis on, because the world population is growing. We'll go into almost 10 billion people in 2050. This is, I think, way above the carrying capacity, what we have. And we have to raise the food production by 60%. And we see that we need more efficiency in agriculture. This is one thing. But we're losing agricultural ground in Europe due to roads, infrastructure. So we should also look into this point, like saving our own agricultural land. And we see that in Africa, for instance, also in South America, a lot of the rainforests are cut for agricultural use. And we will not survive this if we go on like this. Because if we lose those forests, we lose biodiversity. And we gain maybe a little food on the other side, but we lose the climate on the other side, and that means we lose a lot of agricultural arable land. I already mentioned education is the key. Education, education, education. To make people help themselves, you need education, but you need education, a real focus on the education people really need. For a long time, Development Cooperation has built universities, they have built schools, but then they had no jobs for those people being educated. So what we do now is, I think, is a very good approach. We try to convince a company to go to a development country, and then the government pays for the school for those workers who could work for this company. I think this is a good approach, because then after school they have their jobs. I'll give you an example. Siemens just built 3 power plants, gas power plants in Egypt, and now the German Development Corporation pays for the education of 5,000 workers for the maintenance of those gas turbines. I think this is the way it should work. Or Volkswagen is going to Rwanda with a new plant, and the same thing, education for the workers for the plant will be subsidized by German government. Then we have digitalization. I think this is a new field, and it's enormous potential for education, because sometimes you do not even need school buildings, because you can do it with a smartphone. It's good for trade, it's good for health, it's all kinds of finance possibilities can be done with digitalization, and the leapfrogging is so that the development goes a lot faster, and some steps could be jumped over. Then we have the topic of carbon dioxide, the world climate. Of course, this is something touching us, our lives. If all rainforests in countries will be cut down, we will not survive this. As I said, we pour a lot of money of German Development Corporation in saving those forests. Not very successful, I have to admit. And the cropland, as I said, have to raise on the one hand, but on the other hand, we have to safeguard those forests. So this is going to be a challenging question in the future. The world lost 12 million hectares tropical forests in 1 year, 2018. And I just came back from Cameroon, and if you drive the road from Douala to Yaoundé, every 30 seconds you pass a truck, like on the picture, mentioned on the picture, with huge trunks of trees. And this is cutting down the rainforest in Cameroon and Central Africa Republic. If we do not invest in electricity production in developing countries, we will not survive this, because most of the countries have coal. They have coal mines. Coal is cheap. Coal can be the coal electricity plants are cheap to run, and this will be their first choice from an economic point of view. But we have to avoid this, otherwise the climate will go beyond 4 degrees, higher than we have it now. And so we have to sort of put in those plants, like solar plants or hydro plants for electricity in Africa, and it could be repaid by if you sell electricity. So this is something we should take a real focus on, otherwise it's going to be much harder to keep the climate to limits we need. Then I just want to mention the e-fuels. I don't know if you know what e-fuels is. E-fuels, does it say anything to you? It's artificial fuels. Like we have fuels like gas for the cars, and if you burn it, carbon dioxide goes into the air. With e-fuels, you reverse the system. You collect carbon dioxide from the air and putting those carbons together to a new carbon chain, which creates methanol in the end. But you need about 7 times the energy which is released by burning, let's say, 1 liter of gas. You need 7 liters, or the equivalent energy of 7 liters of gas, to put it back together. But this is no problem, as we have energy on this planet for free, almost for free, like the sun we have there. And we're thinking of huge plans of like 10 kilometers square solar panels in the desert of the Sahara, and then we have the energy rather cheap, and then you can produce those artificial fuels and put them into the gas tanks of cars or planes. So this would be a carbon cycle going on, and this is very important, and this is huge potential, because we cannot do this in Europe. We can only do this in the solar belt, which is sort of close to us. It would be Africa, like countries like Egypt or the whole Sahara region could do that, and this would be enormous advantage for both sides. It's a win-win situation. So this is the end of the presentations. I could not cover everything in what is going on in development cooperation, but I think I have given you an idea what we have done and where we could go.
So we've got about 20 minutes for questions. I'll ask you, if you do ask questions, please try to keep it short and sweet and to the point. Pick as you like.
Go ahead.
Please introduce yourself as well, so you know where you're coming from.
My name is Christoph. I'm from America, and a few comments, one brief question. You noted that German funding only went to where certain standards are met, and where those standards aren't met, there won't be funding. However, with funding comes a rising level of prosperity, with that a rising standard of decency. So is it not a little backwards to say we won't fund you until you meet the standard, when funding could help reach the standard? Second, in saying that Africa needs more money that can be provided, why couldn't this be set by simply having a fixed interest rate, which often is not given to countries in Africa when they borrow in the first place? And sorry, not to be on the offense here, but I was curious, maybe as far as giving a lot of credit to Western politics, saying it has a reputation for stabilizing countries, which is more of a comment than a question. But the real question is, strengthening the trade of Africa, the EU needs to go into making infrastructure and whatnot. Would it consider doing so outside the World Bank or through another channel? And lastly, well, trade is good. The playing field trade for a lot of countries in Africa simply isn't balanced. And so rather than going in and increasing quote unquote development, would it not be better for Western companies and economic actors to actually leave and let local economies develop, and thus strengthen themselves to be able to play on that playing field, particularly since it's largely capitalist.
Okay, this was 4 questions, and I try to remember all of them. The number 1 question was,
Number 1 question was funding increases.
Right,
of
okay.
grading standards.
So the idea of that with government funds, a development could be done is wrong. Is absolutely wrong. The economy can only develop by private money, private investment, because government will never have enough money to foster whole budgets of other countries.
So then why require the standard if money is required? I'm losing you there.
No, so let's say, as I said, we can try to trigger investment with the government money we have. But to take government money to feed other countries' budgets is a bad idea because it hasn't worked out for 30 years. So we have to sort of change our minds in that direction. And a lot of people still believe that government money could do a change in those countries. It can only trigger some things, like we could support education, which in the long run will be doing well. It has nothing to do with the standards of living. Like if you see the population and the numbers of population, and you see how much money we spend, it'll be 50 cents for everyone or something like that.
I should have clarified. By standards, I mean more along the human rights standards. Certain standards
Yeah.
are often put above these countries to meet for getting the funding.
Okay. This was another question. As I said, we try not to support any kind of governments who not apply or respect human rights and labor conditions and so forth, slavery and so forth. We will not see this. And this is why we say we have to shift from those governments towards other governments who promise to do reforms, to respect those rights, and leave the others just with a little funding for civil society and maybe basic education. So just divide those 2 things. Third question was?
Third question, the good government doesn't necessarily equal development. Development requires so much more than just having good governance, and I understand that'd be good governance on Germany's behalf to aid in development, but the lack of development isn't necessarily shown by the parties in Africa or their governing forces. There's so many variables there, and so it's a bit of a positive feedback loop to say you don't get the funding to meet standards when, again, this is a fundamental disagreement, but funding seems to help people meet standards.
Yes, of course, we have a lot of programs where we try to convince governments to meet standards. Like we have a decentralization program in Cameroon. It has been running for 30 years. But what is the result? Almost zero. So we have to change. Like if we fund more civil society, so civil society will demand from their governments more and more civil rights or political rights, freedom of speech and so forth. So we're working on that way, I think. And the last question was regarding the companies.
Yes.
Why should companies go there rather than having developed their own economy?
Yes, it often seems that they disrupt local economies, which only puts several countries in Africa in a worse position to actually engage on the international market than in a better one.
But this is a basic economic question. I think if you look at your own history, in Germany, we had small farmers, like say 80 years ago. Everybody had 3 hens, a goat, a sheep, and a cow, and so forth. And you have this kind of agriculture in Africa. But then people start to specialize, mechanize, and so forth. And you need jobs for the others. And in the end, you have a sort of a division in society. One part lives in the city, and the other part lives in the country. It feeds the city. And Africa, or all countries will go the same way. And so you need those factories, you need production on the ground to have jobs. Otherwise, they will not have jobs. And this is good when foreign investment comes in to give those jobs. If you look at the population growing in some countries, There's no other solution.
That's an interesting take, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Francis Adams. I'm a former staff of the GIZ in Ghana, Sierra Leone, and also in Ashbourne. My experience with the GIZ project was that most of the projects that were to be implemented in the beneficiary countries were developed outside the specific African country. Let's say in Ashbourne, and then technical staff will be sent to, say, Ghana or Sierra Leone to implement the projects with the local governments also. And to me, the important thing there was the planning level errors, because some of the projects lacked the local ideas. You know, the intercultural layer was quite heavy in these projects. So the project success was usually, you know, dependent on how critical the planning level errors were. I left the organization for further studies up to now. I don't know how that has changed, but I just want to know, what is your opinion on that? The local involvement at planning level for these projects.
Yeah, I think this is very, very, very important. But usually, like, they have negotiations between the two government of Germany and government like an African country, and they decide on in which programs they should invest. And so the German government considers that the local interests are being reflected in those negotiations. But sometimes it's totally different, like those people in the government living in the city, but then you have a rural project, and then you have a problem. I see your point, and this is really something we should work on. I see there is a deficiency, yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shola. I'm a student in ICD. I want to make a comment in relation to Africa and Europe. In your comments, you spoke about corruption in Africa, and in relation with Africa and Europe, I'm trying to make a point of there is a need for the era of aid to Africa to come to an end in Africa. And why say so? I would like a situation where these aids are being, factored into supporting Africa infrastructurally, so Africa can develop economically and think for itself, and do not rely on aids from other continents. It's really important. And about China coming to invest in Africa and putting in the clause of having this investment, taking over mines or resources in Africa, I'm not in support of such initiative. I'm from Nigeria, and I think Nigeria has been very cautious in relating with China in this aspect. And my point is there is a need for Europe to place corrupt African governments, make it very uncomfortable for them to relate with Europe, make pressure on corrupt African governments to make sure they do not find a suitable means of, where they could siphon money from African continent to Europe, just like the case of Nigeria about a year ago now, like 9 months and a year now, about close to $1 billion has been returned to Nigeria from corrupt officials just from Nigeria alone. This shows you that there is a need. Africa does not need aids. There is enough resources for Africa to develop itself. But we need partnership from Europe to make sure corrupt governments in Africa do not find it easy to move money from Africa to Europe. And that's my point.
I completely agree with your comment. This is absolutely the point of view we should take, because corruption is a disease, a terrible disease, which hinders development extremely, but it's hard to fight. It's really hard to fight. But we should not accept any kind of corruption. And like we had the case in, I think it was in Tanzania, where there was money stolen from aid being given by Great Britain. There was a little scandal, and that didn't influence the other European countries spending further aid in Tanzania. So this is something Europe should unite on. So if there is a case of corruption or stealing aid money, they should act unite, because this gives more pressure on those countries, as you said. Behind you?
I
education in a way, and that there is corruption in Africa, and all those things, they are all tied together. I want us to also consider the fact that development relies on liberation. I mean, if you are liberal, you can develop. And often we forget when we talk about development about the fact that Africa is still linked in the debt. And they have a lot of debts. And if the debt is linked to structural programs that limit their education, I don't think they can invest in education. So I think when we say Africa, they are not educated, or we have to invest in education, then I think that's not the point actually. If we would like to stop poverty in Africa, I think it's just a scissors to take a string, because we could just say cut the string of structural programs limiting Africa to advance. So I think if Germany, I'm German and I accept that fact because I see myself as a German, if Germany wants to contribute in the development of Africa, then in the international range we should act on shrinking the structural program. That's my point, and I'd like you to comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah, as I said, I think Europe should unite and this sort of things, and get pressure on corruption and so forth. And on the other hand, investment in infrastructure. But on the same hand, I do not agree with you that there is no education needed. I think education is the key to development.
Education cannot be given if the means are not there.
Yeah, but you can support education.
Less on education of such social areas, then I think you can't really invest in it, and you can't really make the community
Yeah.
or the society really grow, advance or develop.
Maybe I was misunderstood. Like, we're not investing, saying we're sending teachers there. This is not the case. We're just trying to give funding so that the education can take place. And maybe some of the governments give money to the children or to the parents that the kids can go to school, because children often contribute to family income, and this kind of means can be covered by aid. Maybe I got you wrong.
Thank you very much for that.
We've got time for one more question, and then after this, we're going to a coffee break. So if you have any more questions, it's a good opportunity to ask any of our speakers. So we'll take one more.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Dr. Ibrahim from Iraq. How do you think that's a good time to Germany and other European unions to lead a Marshall Plan in the Middle East, especially in the countries that were destroyed by war, like Iraq and Syria?
Of course, there is a lot of money needed to rebuild Iraq, which has been destroyed by the war. But I've been visiting Iraq recently, and there's a lot of political problems still to solve. There's also corruption, and Iraq is divided by three at this point. So in three regions: the Kurd region, the central region, and the southern region, and the influence of Iran in the southern region, and the Kurds still having the wish to establish their own autonomous regions. I think this is the first thing, but once things stabilize, I think there was a big conference of all countries trying to raise money for to rebuild Iraq. But I think Iraq has one more problem. They have been living from selling oil. So most of the income in that country comes from living oil, and that has led to a huge government functionary public sector. A lot of people work in the public sector, and if you ask a young man from Iraq what he wants to do in his life, he wants to be a functionary. So there is no entrepreneurship. There is no culture of private enterprise. So the spirit of private enterprise and the spirit of developing an economy is lacking, because this huge public sector has to come down and has to shrink, which is a huge problem because unemployment rate is already high. And if you shrink the public sector, unemployment will go even higher. But it's the only way to create private enterprise and a framework for private enterprise. So it's going to be difficult.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. On that occasion, let's please express our sincere gratitude to the